The horse came out of the cedar brake, lathered white and running blind. Clara Bell caught the gate before it could slam back on its hinges, stepped straight into the animal's panic, and laid one hand on its neck the way her father once had taught her. Firm, low, like fear was a thing that could be talked down if you refused to answer it with more fear. The gelding shuddered under her palm. The rider draped across its back lifted his head once, enough for her to see blood dried black in one eyebrow and a face lined by sun and long roads. "Don't let them sell the south pasture," he said. Then he slid from the saddle and hit the dirt at her feet. "Before we go any further, settle in wherever you are tonight and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. There is comfort in knowing how many good people gather around one story when the day is done." Clara dragged the stranger onto the porch boards and propped him against the post. Blood, leather, and hot horseflesh hung in the dry morning air. Behind her, Bell Crossing sat in the same strained stillness it had worn for months. Patched barn roof, leaning corrals, half-full barrels, and inside the kitchen the bank's last letter hidden under the sugar tin because she was tired of seeing the future written in somebody else's ink. 3 weeks. Pay the debt or forfeit the ranch. The man woke when she pressed a wet cloth to his temple. His hand snapped around her wrist with old strength. "Easy," she said. "If I meant to rob you, I'd have let your horse keep going." His grip eased. "Where am I?" "Bell Crossing, north of Mobidi." He looked past her toward the yard as though measuring land by memory alone. "Then I made it far enough." He swallowed, winced, and forced out the words. "Rafael de la Cruz. Used to ride this country when it was more open and men were smaller inside it. You know my south pasture? Know the spring there. Know the bluff above it. Know that men do not send riders after an old vaquero for grass alone." The room seemed to tighten around her. "Men sent riders after you?" "2, maybe 3. I lost one. The others may not be lost for long." His steady gaze held hers. "Keep your lamps low tonight. And if you have a rifle, load it before dusk." Those were not the words of a man asking for shelter. They were the words of a man measuring whether a house could stand the weather coming at it. Clara stood, crossed to the mantel, and took down Everett's Winchester. She checked the chamber. "Loaded." Rafael watched and gave the smallest nod. "Good. First lesson. Never look frightened in your own house. Walls remember it." She almost told him to leave anyway. But Sensible had not saved her husband from a snapped rig chain last winter, and it had not slowed the bank or the men waiting for the widow inside Bell Crossing to tire. So she let him stay. That night she sat with the rifle across her knees while the house cooled around her. Coyotes yipped somewhere far down the wash. A screen door tapped once in the wind. Near midnight she heard hooves on the lane, slow and deliberate, then fading. The kind of riding meant to be heard. By dawn Rafael was awake and on the porch, one boot half on, coffee gone cold in his hand. "You sleep?" he asked. "Enough. That will have to do. Saddle your mare." The morning was pale and clean, the sort of sky that made trouble look almost foolish. Clara mounted and followed him south. Even bruised and stiff, Rafael rode as if he and the horse had made an old pact. He noticed what she had missed 100 times. Loose wires singing in the breeze, quailed dust under sage, her mare shortening stride on broken stone. "You cinch too fast," he said. "She bears it." "Yes," he said. "The strong often do. That is why people keep asking it of them." At the south pasture he dismounted beside the low bluff above the spring. "Oil," he said. Clara stared. "You're certain?" "Certain enough to get bloodied for coming here." He stood slowly. "Panhandle cattle and land wants your note unpaid. They take the ranch, they take the water rights, and they take what sits under them." For a second the whole pasture seemed to tip. Bell Crossing was not simply failing. It was being driven toward failure. "How do you know this?" Rafael looked out over the grass. 20 years ago, I rode for your father, Tom Bell. I found the seep then. He swore he would wait until the time was right. He died before it came. A month ago, a surveyor I knew sent word that company men were digging through old plats and asking about Bell land. I came to warn whoever was left. Her father was gone. Everett was gone. Clara stood on land everyone thought was already halfway dead and realized the fight was larger than debt or widowhood. That was the point of no return. She looked at Rafael and said, "Then teach me what to do." He set his hat against the sun. "Everything I know, but you will have to learn it fast." By noon half the county knew a stranger had turned up at Bell Crossing. At the mercantile, Mrs. Kittredge asked Clara, too casually, whether she had taken in board. Outside, Deputy Lynn Harrow lounged at the hitch rail, handsome in the slick way of men who borrow authority until they mistake it for character. "Here you picked up company," he said. "Here you collect other people's business for sport," Clara answered. He smiled. "Just looking out. Drifters bring trouble, especially Mexican riders with big stories." She felt the insult hit like grit in the teeth. "Mr. de la Cruz is working for me. On what wages?" "I was under the impression Bell Crossing could barely afford sunlight." Before Clara could answer, Rafael stepped from the shadow of the awning and took the heavier of her sacks, as if the conversation bored him. "A ranch cannot afford ignorance," he said mildly. "That costs more than wages ever will." Harrow's eyes narrowed. "Know you from somewhere?" "If I had that misfortune," Rafael said, "I'd remember it." For a moment Clara thought Harrow might go for his pistol. Instead he spat into the street and stepped aside. "Keep him close," he said. "Some men vanish out here, and the world keeps turning." They loaded the wagon in silence. Once they were clear of town, Rafael said, "Second lesson. A threat spoken soft is still a threat. Count every man who smiles while he gives one." Back at the ranch, he worked her like he meant to save her from hesitation. He taught her to read a trail by what the ground would not hide, and to sort a sick calf from a healthy pen by sound, eyes, and the set of its weight. "A ranch is a body," he told her while they repaired fence by the creek. "Most people only notice it when something breaks. A good rancher feels the trouble before it becomes pain." No one had spoken to her that way since her father died, as if the ranch belonged inside her mind and not merely on a paper bearing her late husband's name. The wire burned her palms, but something in her began to stand up straight again. At supper, Rafael spread ledgers and rough maps on the table and asked the questions no banker had bothered with. Which herd held weight best through drought? Which buyer paid slow? Which pasture came back first after rain? Under the lamplight, the last hard year started forming shape. Everett had not ruined the ranch alone. Pride, delay, and the bank had done their share. "They call you green because they want you ashamed of learning," Rafael said. Clara stared at the numbers. "I am green. So is spring grass," he replied. "Doesn't stop at feeding a valley." That line stayed with her. 3 days later, Horace Talbot arrived in a black wagon trimmed with brass and polished certainty. He sat in her parlor with gloves folded across one knee and accepted coffee the way a man accepts tribute from land already entered in his own books. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "I represent panhandle cattle and land in a spirit of generosity. Your debt is serious. Your position, delicate. But my employers wish to spare you public difficulty. Sign Bell Crossing over now, and we will see you comfortably settled in Amarillo with a modest allowance." Clara remained standing behind her father's old chair. Rafael said nothing from the window. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Talbot's smile thinned. "Then the note is called. The sheriff supervises seizure. Creditors circle. Men talk. A woman alone rarely fares well under that sort of pressure." There it was. The easy road. Sign. Keep a little dignity. Save what small future could still be tucked into a boarding house room and called survival. She thought of Everett's gloves by the door, her father's grave beyond town, the spring in the south pasture, the way Rafael had said walls remembered fear. The right choice would cost. She picked up the coffee pot and calmly poured into Talbot's cup until it spilled over the rim and into the saucer. "My answer," she said, "is no. And because I was taught some manners after all, I'll give you 1 minute to collect your papers before I throw you off my porch in front of your driver." Talbot dabbed at the spill, all polish cracking at the edges. "You are making a child's mistake." "No," Rafael said without looking at him. "She's making a rancher's calculation." Talbot's eyes slid to Rafael, sharpened, and in that single glance Clara saw recognition. Real recognition. Not for a drifter, but for a witness. When Talbot stood, his voice had gone cold. "Next Thursday the note comes due. Sentiment will not protect you." After he left, Clara's hands shook hard enough to rattle the cups. Not because she regretted refusing him, because she understood what refusal had purchased. The pressure came quickly. 2 steers were run through her north fence by mistake. The well bucket rope was cut in the night. Harrow brought the bank's final notice himself. "Thought I'd spare you a trip," he said. Clara read the letter while he watched. Formal words. Final demand. "You enjoying this?" she asked. Harrow shrugged. "Business is business. Men with money improve a county." Sentiment just fills graveyards. Rafael was in the barn, too far to hear. Clara stood alone with the paper in her hand and the smell of hot dust rising off the yard. "Tell me something," she said. "When you've sold every poor family around here to Talbot by the acre, do you get paid in cash or just the pleasure of watching?" His face changed. Small. Mean. He leaned from the saddle until she could smell tobacco on him. "Mind your mouth. Barns burn. Stock strays. Lone women find out how large the dark is." Then he touched 2 fingers to his hat and rode off. That evening, Clara and Rafael sat on the porch steps while the last heat left the boards. Crickets rasped in the grass. Down by the creek, a nighthawk dipped and called. Bell Crossing smelled of horses, dust, and the tired sweetness of hay. "What would you have done in my place?" Clara asked quietly. "Signed and saved what could be saved? Or held on and risked losing the whole thing?" And for those of you listening, I wonder the same. There comes a moment in some lives when safety and self-respect no longer ride the same trail. Rafael rested his forearms on his knees. "I signed once," he said. "Not land. A statement. Men needed blame for a fire in New Mexico. I told myself I was protecting my wife and son by giving them the name they asked for. The man I named was hanged. My wife left me anyway." She said fear had done the leaving first. Clara turned toward him. She had not expected to hear tenderness inside a confession shaped like regret. "You had a family. A long time ago." He looked at his rope-burned palm as if the whole history of it sat there. "That is why I ride straight at certain mistakes now. I already know what it costs to go around them." The words settled warm and heavy between them. Then a gunshot cracked from the lower pasture. They were moving before the echo died. Rafael grabbed a lantern and his rifle. Clara snatched the Winchester and ran for her mare. Moonlight broke in pale strips over the grass as they rode toward the creek. Another shot. Then the orange leap of fire. The hay shed was burning. 2 riders were driving her cattle through the open south gap, trying to stampede them toward the ravine. Flames licked up dry timber with the greedy speed of men working to a plan. "Harrow," Clara said. "And help," Rafael answered. "Turn the herd. Save the stock first." She kicked forward. Dust hit the back of her throat. A horn clipped her thigh and nearly spun her out of the saddle. She cut across the lead cows, shouting, forcing them away from the gap. There was no room now but movement. To her right, Rafael rode straight at one of the men pushing the herd. Horse struck horse. Someone cursed. A pistol cracked. The sound was swallowed by cattle and fire. "Short. Fast. Turn them. Keep them off the ravine." The second rider wheeled toward the shed, maybe to spread the blaze to the barn. Clara hauled her mare around and saw Harrow clearly in the firelight, coat open, face white and ugly with effort. He lifted his gun. So did she. For one frozen beat, the whole world narrowed to a trigger and the blood beating in her hands. Then Rafael's lariat came out of the smoke and snapped tight across Harrow's arm. The deputy fired wild. Rafael jerked hard, dragging him from the saddle. "Leave the other one," Rafael shouted. The fire. Sparks were already racing across the grass toward the barn. Clara spurred for the water cart. Rafael, limping now, met her there. Together they hauled buckets, flung water, soaked a black strip between burning shed and stable. Heat struck them like a wall. Smoke tasted of old summer and ruin. A beam crashed inside the shed. From the barn came the high, terrible scream of trapped horses. Clara dropped her bucket and ran. "No," Rafael barked. But she was already fighting the bar free with burned fingers. Inside, the geldings slammed the stalls white-eyed and wild. One kicked and caught her shin hard enough to light sparks behind her eyes. She got the nearest halter loose, then another. Rafael was beside her a second later, coughing, knife in hand. "You lead," he said. "I'll drive." "Your leg." "Lead." They forced the horses into the yard just as sparks hit the eaves. Clara stumbled. Rafael caught her by the elbow. For one breath of stillness in the middle of all that terror, she saw his face close to hers, ash-streaked, tired, absolutely certain. "Listen to me," he said. "Land can be rebuilt. If they take you with it, they win twice." Then he turned back toward the fire. By dawn, the hay shed was a black skeleton. The barn still stood, charred but living. Most of the herd had been recovered. Harrow lay trussed in the tack room with his arm half useless and his ankle swelling purple. The true blow came when Sheriff Baines arrived and announced there was not enough proof to arrest his deputy for anything. "Looks like a ranch accident with too much excitement around it," he said. "And if you keep a county officer tied up, Mrs. Bell, I'll be obliged to charge you instead." Talbot arrived before noon, all condolences and polished boots. "A tragic development," he said, gazing over the burned shed. "These losses only worsen your position. I could still persuade my employers to show mercy." Clara had never hated a voice more. Rafael stood stiff with pain, but straight. "Mercy from the man who sent fire in the night is a poor bargain." Talbot's eyes stayed cool. "Careful. Accusations require evidence." That was the real storm, Clara understood then. Not the flames. The truth standing in plain sight, while power refused to see it. At that moment, Mrs. Kittredge's delivery boy galloped into the yard with a telegram for Rafael. He read it, then handed it to Clara. "Eli Morrow, arriving noon train. Ledger from Talbot Partnership. Records of payoffs to Harrow and Baines. Keep your ground." Talbot moved first, turning for his horse. Clara leveled the Winchester at his chest. "You take one more step," she said, calm enough to frighten herself, "and I will assume you're running from evidence and act accordingly." Nobody breathed. Talbot looked at the rifle, then at her, and some final trace of dismissal left his face. "You're a dangerous woman, Mrs. Bell." "No," she said. "I'm just finished being convenient." They kept him there until Eli Morrow arrived in a borrowed buckboard, dusty, unshaven, and clutching an oilcloth-wrapped ledger like a Bible he hoped might finally save somebody. They gathered in Clara's kitchen around the same table where debt had seemed like fate 4 nights earlier. The room smelled of coffee, salve, and smoke-damp clothes. Outside, neighbors who had heard about the fire were quietly helping repair the south fence. Eli laid open the ledger. Inside were payments to Harrow, payments to Baines, false valuations, rigged foreclosures, and neat little notes on ranches that would be easier to seize after accidents, illness, or public embarrassment wore down the owners. Bell Crossing was not unique. It was simply next. "I kept copies because I did not trust the men paying me," Eli said. "Then I got drunk instead of brave. Rafael found me and called me a coward until I sobered up enough to travel." Rafael almost smiled. "I may have used harsher nouns." While the others read, Clara cleaned the burn along Rafael's forearm. He watched her wind the bandage with an odd stillness. "Why come back for this?" she asked softly. "You could have warned me and kept writing." His gaze stayed on her hands. "Because some debts do not belong in ledgers. Years ago I let fear make me useful to bad men. Saving a ranch will not raise the dead, but it might let me meet my own eyes again." She tied off the bandage. "For what it's worth, you look like a man who came back in time." He shook his head once. "No one comes back in time, but sometimes they come back useful." Later she found him on the porch looking toward the south pasture. "Funny thing about broken ground," he said, almost to himself. "Give it one honest rain, and it remembers what it was meant to grow." If that line touched something tender in you, then you are exactly who this story was written for. A like and a subscribe tell us to keep bringing you stories where quiet goodness is not wasted. Clara leaned beside him on the railing. "You ever think of staying?" He let out a soft breath that almost became a laugh. "On a ranch owned by a woman who argues like a lawyer and shoots like Judgment Day? Sounds unsafe." "I was thinking as foreman." That jest left his face. The loneliness under it did not. "Foremen get wages," he said. "They are not often asked to belong." She looked out over the yard because some truths went down easier if you said them side by side. "Then it is fortunate I was offering more than wages." The silence after that held tack clinking in the barn, a creek talking low in the cottonwoods, and every hurt 2 careful people had carried too long. Rafael spoke first. "My wife died hating what fear turned me into. My son died before I earned the right to ask forgiveness. I have spent years believing the best of me was buried with them." Clara's throat thickened. "Everett wasn't cruel," she said. "But pride makes wreckage too. He thought protecting me meant keeping me blind. Some days I miss him so sharply I cannot breathe right. Some days I'm angry at the work his silence left behind. Most days it's both." Rafael nodded. "That is the trouble with love. It does not stay inside one feeling." She gave a small, breaking laugh. "No, it surely doesn't." He turned toward her, and the whole porch seemed to quiet around what he said next. "A person can start again," he said, without pretending they began unhurt. There it was. The line meant to last. She reached for his scarred hand, and this time he let her keep it. Warmth, but not safety. Because before sunset, Sheriff Baines returned with 2 state investigators summoned by Eli's telegrams, and the reckoning began. The final confrontation happened in Clara's yard before neighbors, hired men, and anyone else brave enough to witness what power looked like when it finally ran out of places to hide. Baines blustered first, claimed the ledger was forged, claimed Eli was drunk, claimed Rafael was a drifter stirring old trouble. But Eli identified the survey marks. Mrs. Kittredge arrived with copies of bank drafts Harrow had cashed for Talbot. One of the McCreary brothers, sweating clean through his shirt, decided prison sounded worse than honesty and admitted he had been paid to cut Clara's north fence the week before the fire. Harrow broke last and ugliest. Faced with the ledger, the witnesses, and 2 state men not beholden to county favors, he named Talbot outright. Talbot kept his posture almost to the end. "This county exists because men like me build it," he said. "No," Clara answered in front of them all. "It exists because men like you keep trying to buy what other people already bled for, and because once in a while you fail." But legal proof was not enough. This county had lived too long on muttered suspicions and frightened silence. So Clara stepped off the porch and read the ledger aloud. Every bribe, every ranch cornered, every widow pushed toward surrender. She read until Talbot's face lost its polish and Baines looked sick and Harrow stared at the dirt like a boy caught stealing from church. The neighbors listened, truly listened. Then old Mr. Weller said, "My brother lost his spread to this outfit." Mrs. Kittredge said, "Mine nearly lost hers." Another voice answered. Then another. It rose not like a mob, but like memory finally refusing to whisper. The investigators arrested Harrow and Baines on the spot. Talbot objected until one of them found the company seal in his case and matched it to the ledger. As they led him toward the wagon, he looked back at Clara with the hatred of a man who had mistaken contempt for victory one time too many. "You'll squander it," he said. "People like you always do when fortune lands under your feet." Clara thought of the spring, the oil, the burned shed, the sleepless porch, Rafael's lessons, and the hard, quiet change inside herself. "No," she said. "People like me know exactly what it costs to stand here." That finished him better than any slap. Within a month, the state froze panhandle cattle and lands claims across 3 counties. The bank, eager to discover its conscience, voided Clara's note and reopened negotiations under terms she herself supervised. Bell Crossing kept its water, its grass, and the mineral rights that would secure the future of the ranch for more than 1 generation. Clara paid her feed debts, hired back 2 hands, and set aside money to help smaller ranchers challenge foreclosures Talbot's company had engineered. And Rafael stayed. Not because the ranch still needed saving in the old sense, though there was always work. He stayed because leaving had stopped feeling like penance and started looking too much like the same old fear dressed in a travel coat. In public he was foreman. In every way that mattered, he was family and the one person on Bell Crossing who never mistook Clara's strength for something inconvenient. He taught the new boys to break a colt without breaking its spirit. Clara learned contracts, buyers, and the fine art of letting men underestimate her into bad decisions. By the time the first drilling crew arrived under a fair lease, every paper passed under her eyes before it touched her land. The county changed, too. Not perfectly, but enough that widows were no longer spoken around as if they were waiting rooms for other men's plans. Enough that Bell Crossing became less a cautionary tale than a landmark. In early spring, when bluebonnets gathered along the creek, Clara rode with Rafael to the hill where Everett was buried. She told the dead man the ranch would survive. She told him she wished he had trusted her sooner. Then she laid her hand on the stone, not in apology and not in surrender, but in farewell to the part of grief that had mistaken silence for loyalty. When she turned back, Rafael was waiting by the horses, hat in his hands. "You ready?" he asked. She looked over Bell Crossing below them, the barn roof bright in the sun, cattle moving through fresh grass, the south pasture keeping its secret wealth under a wide sky. "I am now," she said. 3 years later, on an evening sweet with cut hay and coffee, Clara stood barefoot on her porch while children from neighboring ranches chased fireflies across the yard, and Rafael, silver at the temples and steady as ever, tuned an old guitar by the steps. The house behind her was paid for. The land beyond it was secure. When he began to play, she set a lantern between them, and the light caught his smile like dawn on a spring after a long dry season. Quiet, certain, and proof that some lost things are only waiting for the right hands to lead them home. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf young woman sent to a mountain ranch because her family called her a burden, and the scarred horse doctor who was the first man to understand that silence can hear lies better than words ever will.